All right, everyone. In this part of the podcast, we're going to be talking about the Empire of Man reveals. That's right, the Warhammer The Old World Empire of Man, as shown at the Warhammer World Championships. Many of you will have probably seen all of this already, but as always, we love to give our opinions on the fabulous world of old, as well as the empire that stood within it. Do you have much exposure, Phil, yourself, to the Empire of Man?
A little bit. I do, actually. In fact, I own some of the models. I managed to pick up some of the plastic kits just before I think they disappeared for my Mordheim project that I was working on a couple of years ago. So, yeah, I'm a fan of some of the sculpts.
You're a fan of Man.
Indeed, yes.
There we go. I myself actually was a Empire of Man or Empire player throughout 8th edition. I had a reasonable collection of Empire, many a cannon and a pistolier and various other handgunners, great swords, all of that good stuff.
Any steam tanks?
Bizarrely, I never actually got a steam tank for my Empire army, which was pretty mad. I mean, was I even playing Empire, I suppose?
Exactly. You weren't.
No, it was a weird one. When I kind of started playing 8th, it was very early on with relatively middle way through. And then essentially the end times started and everything just became about crazy Karl Franz and his mad profiles. He kind of just built into that and long lines of great swords. And yeah, it just kind of became the vibe. At the time, I seem to remember, and I may be wrong, but certainly in our local meta, the steam tank just wasn't, doing anything special. So it just kind of, in a way, I feel like, I missed out on something truly iconic and something that really probably should have been in my army, but it just wasn't, Phil. Thank you for exposing me and my...
There's a fraud.
Exactly. My fair weather Empire of Man fandom. But obviously Empire has been in Old World since it began. Those of us who still have Empire armies were and are able to play them. But now, much as has been the case with Tomb Kings, Orcs and Goblins, Chaos, or Warriors of Chaos, I should say, they're now getting the lovely treatment and getting a series of re-releases as well as potentially down the road, they say, some new miniatures. But there was no new stuff on show in this particular segment. They were focusing predominantly on the stuff that's come before, such as your steam tanks, your regiments of Umis of various denominations. That was basically what they were showing off on this occasion. But it's exciting, isn't it, Phil, to see the Empire return to Old World, even though they were there all the while, I suppose.
Yeah, I think the only interesting thing to really say about this range is they're probably the one that has been away from the kind of Games Workshop store for the least amount of time, because basically these were still available for most of Age of Sigmar and then sort of retired just before the latest Cities of Sigmar release that happened last year, I believe. So most of this is still probably fresh in a lot of people's minds. I think some of the kits did disappear a bit before that. But they still hold up. They're still really good. They're sort of reasonably scaled. They've got a lot of kind of customization. And because obviously I got some of the kits for my Mordheim. And yeah, it's a classic sort of torso, separate legs, separate arms that, they can wave around and do the old swiveling around. Look, people can see stuff now. We're doing videos. So there's a lot of sort of fun customization in that respect with these kits. Sort of being slightly more simplified than the kind of the newer cities AOS style, sort of, the mono pose, as people like to say, kits.
I mean, it's certainly going to be easier to rank them up now that they will be, like everything, on the bigger bases. Again, to your point, though, the steam tank is still, prevalent within AOS at the moment. So there have definitely been a lot of stuff that is already existing or going on to, remain in AOS. Most notably here, the old, hero on Griffin. That's still very present within AOS, although maybe a slightly different vibe to what it represents in the Old World and Empire. But yeah, it's exciting that they're getting all of the main releases, their own Arcane Journal. No idea necessarily on exactly what they're covering off there. I imagine they'll expand on all manner of things. The fact being that this is in a different period of time, so this isn't the empire of Karl Franz and the world that was prevalent in 8th edition. This is olden times still. Does it say much in the article about that, Phil? I have to admit, I've not read it in detail.
Well, it talks about the 2 armies of infamy that you can get in the Arcane Journal is the City-State of Nuln and the Knightly Orders of the Empire, plus a bunch of obviously special characters. So yeah, this is the period of the civil war between, is it the 3 emperors? So yeah, there's definitely different factions, and it'll be interesting to see the sort of the new style paint schemes that you'll be doing, a bit like what they did with Bretonnia, where they gave them a different look and feel to sort of set it all in the sort of slightly older time period.
Indeed. It is awesome, though, to see that we're going to get some resin minis being added in, as well as also the old war wagon. The war wagon is a truly spectacular old kit from way back when, and yeah, it's just awesome to see that return to the forces of the Empire. It definitely feels like a release with lots of amazing stuff from ye olden times brought back into it. So it's really cool to see this range become available once more. Again, obviously these kits here, I think these were forgive me if I'm wrong here, but I think these Forge World Remnants and Miniatures were released in support of some of the Warhammer Forge campaign books that they did way back when.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they were. They released a bunch of units as well. And I think they weren't allowed to release them as single standalone kits, so the units were sort of upgrade kits for the plastic Rangers. Because I remember I was trying to look at getting some a while back, and they were gone and disappeared for time immemorial, and even sort of secondhand, it was like super hard to get hold of. So it's great that some of the Forge World ones are coming back, because their sculpts were really fantastic. The War Wagon, oh my god, that's like a thing from my childhood. So what's interesting now is, rather than it being metal, is going to be redone in resin, and they've sort of said they've upscaled it and sort of crispened up the details somehow. I think the horses were completely new, I think they said. So yeah, that is a sort of iconic piece that much like the Marauder Giant, I'd be tempted to buy just to own, because even though it's not a faction I'm collecting, it's just an iconic miniature of my childhood. Yeah, and the Marauder Giant I picked up, I'm sort of looking forward to building that at some point. And yeah, maybe at some point I'll get this as well.
Yeah, I am. It's fair to say sorely tempted by the notion of recollecting Empire. I've gone very heavy into Tomb King, and I am really enjoying the Tomb King. I think they're a really cool army, and I'm definitely enjoying building them and one day painting them. Not started that yet. I mean, that's the thing. I'm quite in deep with the with the Tomb King right now, but depending on how I get on with that, I might just be tempted to add a Force of Empire to my collection. But I just think it's fantastic. I mean, again, this stuff obviously speaks to me because the nostalgia is strong. I've really been digging in deep with Old World and with this particular setting and this particular game. I definitely find it really evocative. I appreciate that at a kind of higher level of play, the game that is being enjoyed by those who enjoy competitive gaming within the confines of Square Bases is definitely quite different in practice than it appears in principle. But I feel like, much like in the world of Heresy, there is this overwhelming sense from the player base that they want to preserve some of the kind of core concepts of the game. So even though infantry, specifically like elite infantry and other things, are pretty underwhelming in terms of the rule set, it is really cool that you're going to be able to build up those rank and flanks and play a good old game of Warhammer, which is certainly how I look at the system. I'm not definitely trying to be the bestest Warhammer the Old World player. I'm just kind of really engaged with the spectacle and the overall kind of awesomeness of it. And I still can't wait, Phil, for you to break out those Chaos Dwarves. I can't lie.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to doing it as well. So I've got some right next to me. In fact, I've got a little one here. Yeah, I've been slowly collecting Chaos Dwarves over the last couple of months, much to my wallet's pain rather than pleasure. But also I've got a dwarf army as well. So I've used that when the dwarves came out to add some of the re-releases of the old models, the kind of Imperial Dwarves. Can't remember what the guy's actual name was, but the Imperial Dwarf units that came out. So I got those and picked up a couple of the characters to flesh out that, and then hunted down on eBay a couple of bits that I was missing. And I've still got probably more missing from that. Whereas, the Chaos Dwarves, I've been, trying to get basically one of everything. And, I've been using my old, Citadel, journals. Is it Citadel journals? No, Citadel catalogs. Cause I've got a couple of those from that time period to just tick off every single variant of the warriors and hobgoblins and stuff. So I've been trying to make sure I've got everything. So I'm complete at some point. So not very fussed about, how competitive stuff will be. It's more, as you say, ticking a sort of nostalgia button, an itch for me for those two armies to do.
That's it. How long do you reckon until they start going back in time and giving us like old school 40k, like 3rd edition 40k?
I mean, it feels possible. And I think that with the sort of advent of basically Primaris onwards, once we start seeing maybe things like Land Raiders and Rhinos being phased out of the game, if at all that does happen, I've said it for many times. There's a time period that's basically 5th, 6th, 7th edition 40k. That your tactical marines, your Devastator squads. That is quite an iconic time period that isn't really represented in the miniature range as it is, because everything's moved to Primaris and it's moved forwards. You've got Primarchs and, you've got new style tanks for the Imperial Guard with the Rogal Dawns and stuff like that. I think there's a sort of the Badab era should be a time piece in and of itself. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they do something similar, whether that's an extension of Heresy, maybe, and they do like a sort of a scouring or onwards and maybe jump the timeline forwards with the Specialist Games Studio, or whether it'll be, it'll have to be, I think. I don't think the main Games Workshop studio would do a sort of nostalgia piece. But it's, the guys that have done Heresy and Old World, it feels fitting for them to do it at some point, maybe. Probably give it another 10 years, I'd say.
Yeah, I'd imagine so, mate. Anyway, there you go. Empire coming to the old world. Not that they weren't all there already, as I've already said. But yeah, great to see the range. Looks like they're going to be giving us access to some incredible sculpts and miniatures that haven't seen the light of day for a while, as well as obviously continuing to give us access to things that have not been away too long, as Phil identified. But yeah, sincerely, looks really awesome. So yeah, I guess we'll move on to the next of the reveals. That's right. It's a different day now for people that are watching this on the video. I'm wearing different clothes. I can't remember if Phil is. I haven't reviewed the footage.
I'm wearing different clothes underneath the same jumper that I'm wearing. For consistency, Dan. People wouldn't have to know if you did the same trick.
That's true. But I broke it. Although they would probably guess by the change in like lighting conditions and other bits and pieces.
Fair.
Well, there we go. Anyway, for podcast listeners, I'll edit this bit out. I've just put it in for continuity's sake on the video side of things. So the segment will begin now. We're talking about the Horus Heresy stuff from the Warhammer World Championships. Of course we are. Not a huge amount of Heresy stuff to discuss, but some interesting things. And Phil loves a tank. He loves the forces of the Imperium. He loves himself, the various Umis and their ongoing efforts to participate. So there's a bunch of that in here. Plus also, since we recorded this, they have also now revealed a new Space Marine character for the Space Wolves. So we'll talk about that as well towards the end, because it looks kind of cool. But yeah, Phil, what was going on with the Heresy? What did they give us?
Well, they teased us with the quintessential flying potato of the Arvus Lighter, which is a staple. It is
a beautiful spud.
Staple of the Imperium, of the Aeronautica, I guess. Interestingly, this came back to Heresy at the very start of the new edition, and they released it to much fanfare in resin. And then we assumed we would never get such a thing in plastic. So interestingly, a couple of years later, it's now back in plastic, which is really cool, I guess. I managed to stumble upon my resin version just recently in a bag somewhere, in amongst loads of other Forge World projects that I have yet to start or finish. But yeah, I remember trying to get hold of this one ages ago because I just love the look of it. It's a very cool mini. It's historically just always been like a transport with no armaments or like weapons options on it, and I think they've now added a few on, but that's not really what it's there for. It's there for transporting a squad around the table.
Well, that's the thing. If you're going to put it on the tabletop and use it in a war game, kind of needs to have some defensive options, but I would assert that they're not especially amazing. The main function, clearly, as it should be, is getting stuff from place to place.
Yeah, and I assume that's what it still does. With
I hope so.
Cute, dinky little look, although it's not that small. It's relatively big as flies go.
It's bigger than a Storm Talon, I would imagine.
Or comparable, yeah. I think, maybe a bit chunkier, but maybe a bit, shorter in height, potentially.
Maybe bigger in the rear, though. Longer, I would imagine.
Yeah, possibly.
Than the old Storm Talon. I feel like the Storm Talon is the smallest of the Imperium flyers. Overall, I'd say the... I can't even remember what they're called now. I haven't seen them in such a long time. The Tau Bomber and Tau Flyer were pretty tiddy.
Oh, right, yeah. No, they were quite small. I guess because this one especially is from the Forge World studio, as it once was called. So
Specialist Games studio,
now
as
Specialist
it is now.
Games, yeah. They were renowned for doing much more sort of true scale miniatures. So their flies were always way bigger than the sort of the plastic Games Workshop ones that the Space Marine ones got produced in. These were a bit bigger, so even though this is one of the smallest, it's still probably quite big in comparison to maybe some of those other some of the Games Workshop ones. But yeah, chunky is a brick basically, which is pretty good. It looks like it's now, I haven't actually read it, looks like it's got little, I presume that it's more like chaff launchers on the front rather than missiles, but it could be tiny missile launchers.
I imagine it's more the chaff launchers or a series of elaborate lights.
I mean, it could be, they're going to blink and blind people to death.
Solar flare!
Yeah.
Solar flare.
And
That's
then,
a Dragon Ball reference that you evidently didn't get, but don't worry.
No, I didn't. And then, at the back, it's got a multi-laser with a guy hanging out the back, which I think is very cool. Which almost feels a nod to the rules that it got in, it was either 8th or 9th edition, where it actually did get some weapon options, even though it didn't have any on the model. So I just assumed it was always a guy hanging out the back with a gun. So I assume maybe not just a multi-laser, you might get other weapon options in there as well.
It kind of gives me the energy of that geezer in the helicopter from the movie Full Metal Jacket, which is admittedly a harrowing reference because it is a horrific and absolutely, abysmal scene where, it's an incredibly well shot and well put together thing, but obviously, it's pretty harrowing. So maybe don't look that up anytime soon. But the idea of the geezer hanging out, shooting out into the void.
I mean, it's quite classic.
Get some,
because the Valkyrie or the Vendetta, one of those, or it's the kit, it's the same thing. Has that option as well on the sides.
Oh, does it?
Yeah,
that's pretty cool. But no, I like the lighter. I think it's a super cool vehicle. It's got a lot of character. I can imagine it being a bit rubbish in game, but that's kind of the point of it, right? Like in a way, it's the charm of it is its terribleness. It's like a mastodon. Looks cool, practically useless.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes you're taking it for the rule of cool more than the practical utility or points cost efficiency that the unit is bringing you, because ultimately it doesn't do stuff other than just move something around the table, which for certain armies is actually quite important. And whether that's it's almost redundant in 40k based on how the rules are done now, with loads of stuff just deep striking around. Feels like flyers and transports are less useful in that game, but in Heresy I think it's still probably got some good usefulness to it.
Yeah, the game of 40k is scaled down to the point that I think no one would be particularly upset if they remove flyers from the game. I mean, they all but have. They kind of appear now and again in sort of a skimmer function, but yeah, ultimately, Heresy is still a game that kind of scales up quite nicely. So if you want to play it in bigger scales with wibbly, weird boards and layouts, it still accommodates that, whereas 40k feels like it's become exceptionally rigid by comparison. But it's still lovely kit, really like it. Next along is more variants of the glorious Malkador. So we have the one with an especially big gun, and then the other one with an especially big flamethrower, which I acknowledge is still itself a projectile weapon, but ever so slightly different.
So it's
you're the resident tank man, Phil. Tell me about these.
Yeah, so the first one's for Valdor Tank Hunter. It's got the neutron laser projector, which is basically like a giant laser cannon. It is a sort of like Titanic scaled weapon. Not quite as good as the ones that would appear on, like, say, for Warhound, for example, or the Reaver, but still pretty good. And it's meant to sort of be kind of comparable in that sort of thing. What's interesting is obviously, so the Malkadors normally have like sponsored weapons on both sides, but one side of this tank is taken up with like extra like power cells. But it's really cool. It's got some cool rules from what I vaguely remember last time I looked at it. Like it just does extra, like an extra chance to like shake the crew, for example, or do some extra damage to them. So yeah, it's pretty interesting vehicle. Visually, it looks cool. I think actually it picked up the resin kit like maybe 1 year ago, maybe 2 years ago, because I was like, oh, before these go, I want to sort of complete most of my collection of the resin Forge World stuff. So I was like, oh, I'll get this one because it's like been up there as like one of my favorites for a very long time.
I think I remember convincing you to go through with it. You were umming and ahhing. I remember being a bad influence / positive.
Yeah, maybe. You basically made me pay maybe not quite double, but a fair bit more than I imagined the plastic kit is now costing.
It'll be a treat to put together by comparison, mate, even with all of the scraping and green stuffing and all the other things that go into it, rather that than the 700 bits of plastic involved in making one panel.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been an advocate for resin, and there is there's definitely a learning curve to building kits in resin, and there's like slippages, and you got mold release agent and stuff like that you've got to sometimes deal with, but ultimately it's like one big chunk of resin for like the whole, and two big bits for the sides, and it all mostly fits together quite well. Not always, but for the most part, great. Whereas you say the plastic kits are a bajillion pieces that you've got to put together. And yes, it's a weird way. In a way, the crispness of them, that they're so sharp and detailed, is almost the thing that makes them always look odd. Whereas the sort of the natural flaws in the old sort of handmade resin ones actually look a bit more realistic, because the sort of the natural waves and indents into it is more akin to what you would get from a real vehicle. It wouldn't just be these smooth flush edges, at least when it's no longer fresh off the factory once it's been in battle for a little bit. So I think those the resin kits still have a charm even now, I think.
I agree. I agree entirely. I think the thing that I've learned that I hate most about building plastic kits now, having been building a bunch recently, I think it's the mold lines that actually, on balance, I've realised that's the thing I hate the most. Because especially as well, like, you never learn. You get every single mini, and then you start scraping all these mold lines off, and then you put it together and realise, I didn't even need to do that bit. Like,
yeah, sometimes if it's done well, a lot of the pieces will get covered up. But often, if it's a really visible mold line, and depending on where it is, especially on like a flat edge or something, it's like difficult to make it look good. And actually, what's worse is like a sort of a seam, like a mold seam line where you got to join two bits together, and there's like a gap that you then need to fix.
To that point, because the thing I've been building a lot of lately, I've got one here, in fact, is the Assault Intercessor with Jump Pack. I actually sprayed this one before, because I gave up. You can see it there for people who can see, but basically the Jump Pack has these horrific lines on them that when you look at the images online, it's like, they're not supposed to be there. I was like, well, if they're not supposed to be there, why have you made it like that? Like, it's so bad. But Yeah, so I'm debating whether I'm like now, like, do I green stuff all of it? I'm like, the answer is no. I'm just going to tolerate it. I'm like, you know what? You know, they had every opportunity to make that into some kind of seam or some kind of
detail
thing that, yeah, but they didn't. So here we are.
Whereas conversely on the resin stuff, quite often it's like, yes, you've got a mold seam, but that you can literally shave that down and you can sand it smooth or whatever. It's a lot easier to deal with a lot of the time. So there are pros and cons to both kits, basically.
Oh yeah, 100%, mate, 100%. And then the next of them is the big flamery one. What's this one?
Macrodoran Furnace. So this was the first kit of the Macrodor variants that I bought many years ago after I think I blew one up in a game of, I think maybe 6th or 7th? No, 7th edition, I think it was, where it had the amazing
blew one up
huge...
in gameplay, not through some kind of active malice.
Yes, it was gameplay. I basically got very lucky in my tank shooting at it, and I managed to make it explode, basically.
Didn't it always just have to explode? I feel like this was back in the day that if it was even like weapon destroyed, it exploded.
I think there was a plus to the table, maybe. So you maybe got +1 to the dice roll because it's so volatile, but I can't quite remember exactly because it was many years ago. So yeah, my point was I bought it many years ago and it's still been in its bag ever since, and I've never got around to building it. But because I think initially it was I bought it in bought it in 7th edition. Bought the templates, the Apocalypse templates with it, because the big teardrop flamer template was the incentive for playing this model. And then they immediately changed it in 8th edition where it was just a bunch of dice, and I think it was only like 2d6, which was terrible.
Well, it used to have the old torrent special rule as well, didn't it? So you could place
so it was like
the flamer template like 18 or 12 inches away from it.
Yeah, it was either 12 or 18.
Insane.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It was very good in terms of what you could cover with it, and super lethal.
I definitely remember it made a mess of things.
Yeah, and you could run it in a poison version, not just a flamer version, so you could be wounding on 2s. You could instantly be killing Space Marines way easier with that version, I think. Yeah, so there were some cool bits to it for sure. It's a really beautiful mini as well. I love the little trailer on the back. Yeah. That's always being
the old trailer looked better though. I feel like the old trailer was a bit sleek. This feels quite compact, whereas I feel like the old one had a bit more. I don't know. Maybe I'm misremembering.
I was just looking at that and thinking the same thing. I think it's like got more of a frame to it that it sits in. Like it's got like this gird on the side, and I don't think that was there in the original one.
Yeah, because the old variant of it had more. Yeah, it felt like it was like more of like a wheelbarrow on the back of it as opposed to sort of a solid fuel cylinder.
Yeah.
Because I always remember. Because the tank would move and the thing at the back would basically, it would create like L shapes and stuff because it would swing.
Could pivot around, yeah.
Yeah, whereas this looks like it's solidly, rigidly.
Oh, behind. Yeah, quite possibly. Yeah. Although they have done some really interesting things with the Cerastus Knights in terms of like the cables and stuff like that being able to flex. There might be an element of that into this one, but who knows? That's a really cool vehicle. Rules wise, I imagine it'll be great because it was you're going back to that giant template. So that'll be fun.
That's the thing, Phil. You gotta get your resin one made and start playing Heresy with it.
I know that is true. I mean, I think now is the incentive for those vehicles and probably for my Krieg army on the whole is to convert a lot of it into basically a militia army for Heresy.
Well, you basically already got it, didn't you? Between that and your Thunder Warriors, which you rep as Custodes, boosh.
Yeah, lots of choice. Yeah.
Mate, you're in there. You probably already have many thousands of points of Horus Heresy without even realising it.
Yeah, true. I think so.
If Tom hears this, if old Garfield gets wind of this, he'll be on the blower to you. He'll be like, come on over then, Phil. Let's get playing some Heresy. Yeah, come to my events. Come on now. Come. Next is weapon upgrades for the Doradio or Derodeo. Are you a Doradio or a Derodero man, Phil?
Derodeo, I think. I mean,
I go Derodeo as well. I like the rhythmics of it, the old Derodeo. I think it's a nice sort of terminology. But I have heard Doradio. I imagine there's probably some other variants.
Doedo.
Doedo.
Could be.
But anyway, so they've added some new weapons to it. So, I mean, these are weapons that evidently you were able to access through the profile before, but you weren't able to put on the miniature itself due to, not having the actual sculpt. So you now basically have access to these plasma cannon variants and las cannon variants, as well as the twin autocannons and the twin Volkites were what was on it already, as far as I was aware.
Right.
Or maybe I'm wrong about that. I feel like the autocannons is what comes with its standard. I'm gonna have to Google this now, aren't I?
Yeah, vaguely feels like that's the case. So maybe they've just split it out into 2 weapon sets as well, but I'm not entirely sure. And I can't remember if they ever produced in plastic the old shield that it was meant to have on top, because I think it was one of those things where when it was the resin version, they previewed an open day or one of the like Warhammer Fest type events, the Deredeo shield that goes on top, which then never materialized, but it was always in the rules. So I think people often kit bash that up. And I don't know if that's still a thing in the new edition of Heresy or if the plastic kit ever got that. But I feel it.
No, I'm fairly sure the plastic kit never got the force field you're referring to.
I feel like they've missed the trick by not bringing it back or bringing it out, because it was never really back to begin with.
I don't even think it's an option in Heresy, though. I think that was exclusively a 40k rule set, and then I don't think they've actually got the option to use it in Heresy. I think you've just got 2 missile variants. But yeah, looking at the image here, it does seem like the autocannons and Ickle missiles were there before. So I think these are there and these are new. Nonetheless, it's cool. The Deredeo is Fab Dread. I have one myself. I haven't got around to building it yet. It's on the bench, so to speak. Sadly, it is a plastic one. I wasn't willing to pay the eBay prices to get a resin one, even though I wish I had, because it would be a lot less of a hassle to build than what I've seen in this thing. But yeah, it's cool. Extra weapons is always cool to see. And to be fair, I think on the one I've put in my list at the moment does actually have the las cannons on it. So I best get around to getting that made. But so not a huge amount for Heresy there, but what there was pretty cool. And they did on Heresy Thursday, which is today at the time of recording, also give us a sight of this new rune priest or caster of runes, as they are calling it, with, Phil, you believe, and I think you're right, the Mark V armor? Is it Mark V?
At least for Mark V helmet, I believe. That's my guess, or a variant of the Mark V, because I think Mark V was often... Wasn't that the one where it was meant to be different armors put together? But I think there were some specific Mark Vs also built. Because, the helmet reminds me of... is it the Carcharodons? And they had some Mark Vs in the Badab War.
There you go.
It's basically the Stormtrooper, grill bits on the side. Which is what made me clock to add to that. And as I said to you just before we recorded this, what often happens, it feels like, with the characters come out first teasing a new mark of armor. And with this one that says this is a Mark V character, and obviously I presume we'll then get the Mark V plastics, in the coming months or next year, because it felt like we got that with the, I guess, what was it, Mark 3s and 4s and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I definitely would have said that's probably the case. I mean, who knows? I mean, at the end of the day, they've done a lot of variants of Space Marine armor now for Heresy, but obviously they're popular, so they're probably going to keep doing it. But for this miniature, and independently of that whole conversation, really like it. I think it's a really cool, stoic and powerful pose. He's got his tactical rock, obviously, which denotes his seniority. The fleshy face I quite like, although I'm always a bit weirded out by Space Marines with bags under their eyes. I appreciate, if he was probably in defense of, the palace during the Siege of Terror, that he's probably a little bit worse for wear.
He's done a long shift.
He's done a long shift, but most of the time with Marines, I'm like, well, I don't know. I feel like they're
getting loads of stims injected into them via their armor, surely. So they should be
exactly.
It should be good.
Exactly. I feel like their blood flow and general fatigue should be pretty reasonable. So yeah, I never really understand the stylistic choice to put the bags under the eyes, but they've done it here. he looks very sleepy, which is very stoic and very sleepy, which is odd, but whatever. That's what they've gone for. I guess it's cold on Fenris, right? Maybe that's what's done it to him.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
But even that is like, come on, it's a Space Marine. He's fine. But whatever. Cool mini though. Cool minis overall. Love a bit of Heresy. Excited to actually start playing it. Been working on, start playing it again. I played it at the start weirdly. Like I was really in there at the start and then dropped off a bit, and now trying to get back into it again proper because it is a great system. So yeah, looking forward to do more of that. But anyway, yeah, that was basically us talking about Heresy. What was your vibe on the Heresy stuff, Phil? Do you think it was good?
Obviously the Macador and the Arvus stuff, love. That's my favourite. The Derrideo, I've never been like a huge fan of it. I've always thought it was like an odd look.
You don't like Tugboat Dreadnought?
No, it's just the weapons just seem too large and long. Which I guess that, it's meant to be like a gun platform, but for me, it's just, oddly proportioned. And when you see like the Plasma and Volkite being way like extended, oversized barrels, it just seems a bit silly to me. That one's just never done it. Whereas the regular Contemptor, I've really loved. The Leviathan, I've thought it's always really cool. But yeah, that version. So yeah, I mean, great if you've got a Derrideo and you want some weapon options. Like, cool, because you need it, right? But yeah, for me, that one is never a kit I've ever thought I would buy. Basically.
Yeah, I suppose that's the thing, isn't it? Where they asked themselves the question, where they did the Contemptor and it was an absolute masterclass. I mean, it's strange to imagine that a lot of people have only lived in a Warhammer world which features Contemptors, because you won't realise the significance that they represented when they came out at the time. I remember all of us just being like, oh my God, what is that? When they kind of came up with it. I mean, Forgeworld absolutely knocked it out of the park with the Contemptor when that came along. And then the Leviathan was like the natural evolution of it, where they were like, it's like a Contemptor, but it's bigger, stronger, and tougher. And it's like, cool, I love that. And then they went Derrideo and they were like, yeah, it's like, so it's got the legs of a Contemptor and a tugboat. Everyone loves that,
Yeah, an odd belly body to it, I guess.
You know what it is to me though, is I felt like it made a lot of sense when they did the original one with just the autocannons, because the autocannons long barrel.
Yeah,
you go, cool,
they
that
look
makes
quite
sense.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah, but then they went, well, we have to put something else on it. Here's a plasma cannon. And it's like, well, I guess it has to be long as well. And it was like, all right, fine. I think the plasma cannon is probably the most, like, odd one.
Yeah, that
like
and the Volkite is a bit odd. But yeah, Last Cannon and Autocannon look better out of those weapon options, for sure.
No, agreed. Anyway, there you go. Top stuff. We're going to move on to the next thing. So, transitional noise.